Looking back on my teenage years, there's one Halloween night that still makes my heart race whenever I think about it. What started as a typical night of trick-or-treating turned into something that would haunt my dreams for years to come. I'm sharing this story now as a reminder that sometimes the real monsters aren't wearing costumes. I was 15 at the time, out with my two best friends, Alex and Mike. Like most kids from our neighborhood, we had this yearly tradition of heading to the wealthy part of town for trick-or-treating. It was no secret that's where you'd find the full-size candy bars and elaborate Halloween displays, a far cry from the fun-sized sweets and plastic pumpkins of our working-class neighborhood. The night was crisp, with fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet as we made our way into the affluent area. The houses were different there, sprawling properties with manicured lawns and long, winding driveways. The streetlights were fewer and farther between, creating pools of darkness between the well-lit porches. We'd only been in the neighborhood for about 10 minutes when we first noticed the truck. It was an old pickup, probably from the 90s, its dark paint dulled with age and rust. As it drove past us, we could make out 5 or 6 men crammed into the cab in bed, their raucous laughter echoing through the quiet streets. One of them shouted something unintelligible at us, the words slurred and hostile. "Probably just some drunk idiots," Alex muttered, but there was an edge to his voice that betrayed his unease. We tried to shake it off, focusing instead on which house to hit next. But sometimes your instincts scream at you that something isn't right, and that night mine were screaming. About 5 minutes later, we saw the truck again. This time it was stopped about 20 feet ahead of us, its engine idling with a low growl that seemed to fill the entire street. The interior lights were off, but we could see dark shapes moving inside. That's when everything went to hell. One of the men suddenly vaulted over the side of the truck bed. In the dim streetlight, I could see he was wearing dark clothes and what looked like a hockey mask. But it wasn't the mask that made my blood run cold. It was what he pulled out of the truck. A chainsaw. The sound of it roaring to life shattered the quiet night. Without hesitation, the man started sprinting toward us, the chainsaw raised above his head. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail. The way the streetlight glinted off the chain, the plumes of exhaust in the cold air, the wild eyes behind that mask. Pure instinct took over. Alex and I bolted up one of the side streets, our feet pounding against the pavement as we ran toward our friend Tommy's house. We knew he lived somewhere in the area, though in our panic, every massive house looked the same. Mike, in his terror, had taken off in the opposite direction. The sound of the chainsaw grew fainter as we ran, but we didn't stop. We ducked between houses, vaulted over pristine hedges, and scrambled through perfectly landscaped backyards. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, we finally lost our pursuer. But Mike was still missing. For the next 30 minutes, we called his phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring ratcheting up our anxiety. We crept through the neighborhood, jumping at every sound, desperately searching for our friend while trying to avoid the truck that we knew was still out there somewhere. Finally, after what felt like hours, we found Mike huddled behind a garden shed in someone's backyard. He was shaking and his costume was torn, but he was alive. He'd run until he couldn't anymore, and then hidden, listening to the sound of the truck driving past several times. We never reported it to the police. What would we say? That some guys in a truck scared us on Halloween? But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a prank. The way they stalked us, the look in that man's eyes as he ran at us with the chainsaw, it felt predatory, like they were hunting us. I still think about that night sometimes, especially around Halloween. I wonder if those men are still out there, terrorizing other kids who are just looking for some candy and fun. These days, when I see news stories about Halloween pranks gone wrong, I can't help but remember the sound of that chainsaw cutting through the night air. And I wonder how many other stories like mine are out there, untold. I never thought I'd have such a personal connection to one of those haunted house stories you hear about. But sometimes the most chilling tales happen right next door. This one takes place in the early 1980s, but when I was just an infant in what seemed like a normal suburban neighborhood. Our next door neighbors appeared to be your typical American family, a couple with two young kids. But appearances can be deceiving, and the walls of their house held dark secrets that would eventually spill out in the most horrific way. My parents often tell me about those nights, the soft knocking at our door at 2 or 3 in the morning. It would be those two kids, sometimes in their pajamas, sometimes still in their day clothes, seeking refuge from the chaos next door. The sound of their father's drunken rage would echo through the thin walls of their house, followed by the shattering of glass or the thud of furniture being thrown. My parents would take them in without hesitation, making up the couch and trying to distract them from the nightmare unfolding next door. The man, from what my parents tell me, was a monster wearing the mask of a family man. During the day, he'd put on a show of normalcy for the neighbors, but behind closed doors, he was cruel and abusive. The bruises on his wife's arms told the real story, though she always tried to hide them with long sleeves, even in the summer heat. Halloween night of 1983 was when everything came to a head. The mother, having endured years of abuse, had carefully planned her escape. She sent the kids to their grandparents' house for what she told them would be a special Halloween sleepover. Looking back, I think she knew what she was going to do and wanted to spare them from witnessing it. That night, after her husband had passed out from his usual heavy drinking, she grabbed a kitchen knife. The official police report would later state that she stabbed him over 40 times, each thrust of the blade releasing years of pent-up fear and rage. By the time she was done, the bedroom looked like something out of a horror movie. My mother testified at the trial, recounting all the nights she'd sheltered those terrified children and the visible signs of abuse she'd witnessed over the years. Between her testimony and the well-documented history of domestic violence, the jury was sympathetic. The woman served minimal jail time and the children went to live with their grandparents permanently. The story might have ended there, but about 25 years later I ran into the current owners of that house. During our conversation, they casually asked if I knew of anything strange ever happening there. When I told them about the murder, the color drained from their faces. They explained that when they first moved in, they'd experienced such intense paranormal activity that they had to have the house blessed by a priest. They described cold spots in the master bedroom, doors slamming on their own, and the sound of heavy footsteps pacing at night. Always around 3 a.m., the estimated time of the murder. The most disturbing incident, they said, was when their young daughter started talking about the angry man who would stand in the corner of her room at night, watching her with eyes like fire. I can't help but think that something of that cruel man remained behind in that house, trapped in an endless loop of that Halloween night when justice finally caught up with him. Sometimes when I drive past that house, I still see lights flicking on and off in the upstairs windows, even when I know nobody's home. The current owners have since renovated the entire house, but they say no amount of new paint or wallpaper can cover up the feeling of dread that settles over the master bedroom at night. They've learned to live with their uninvited guest, though they never sleep in that room. It's been converted into a home office that nobody uses after dark. It's strange to think that as an infant, I slept peacefully through such a violent night. But maybe that's why these stories fascinate us so much. They remind us that behind every normal-looking facade, there might be something far more sinister lurking. waiting for its chance to surface. Of all the Halloween stories I could share, this one stands out because it's completely true, though most people don't believe me when I share it. That particular Halloween had started normally enough. I remember spending the afternoon helping my parents decorate our house, my dad on the ladder hanging ghost lights along the gutters, while my mom arranged ceramic pumpkins and plastic tombstones across our front lawn. The air was crisp with that distinct October chill, and leaves in brilliant shades of orange and red skittered across our driveway like nature's own Halloween confetti. Our neighborhood always went out for Halloween. Every house had jack-o'-lanterns flickering on their porches, fake cobwebs stretching between trees, and the occasional mechanical witch or ghost that would startle trick-or-treaters. Our house was no different. My parents had decorated our colonial-style home with the usual Halloween flair, including some plastic skeletons on our wraparound porch and a bowl of candy by the door. The old-fashioned wooden porch swing was decorated too, draped with fake spiderwebs that would sway in the autumn breeze. On Halloween night, after all the trick-or-treaters had gone home and my parents had turned off the porch light, they let me stay up late watching horror movies on TV, a special Halloween treat. Most kids my age would have been in bed by then, but I loved these late-night privileges. The living room was dark except for the TV's glow and the occasional flicker of our now melting jack-o'-lanterns outside. I was drifting off on our floral print couch around midnight, some old zombie movie playing quietly in the background, when I heard it. The distinctive squeak of our porch swing's rusty chains. At first, I thought it might be some late-night trick-or-treaters or maybe teenagers pulling pranks. But the sound had an eerie rhythm to it that made my skin crawl. Heart pounding, I crept toward our bay doors, carefully pushing aside the fake cobwebs we'd hung there. What I saw through the glass made me freeze in terror. There, illuminated by our dying jack-o'-lanterns, sat a woman in her 50s, wearing nothing but a white nightgown. But this was no Halloween costume. The nightgown was covered in real, dark blood, and in her right hand, she clutched a large kitchen knife that caught the orange light as she slowly rocked back and forth. I ran screaming to my parents' room, but terror had stolen my ability to form words. My father, probably thinking I was just scared from the horror movies, got angry when I finally managed to stutter out what I'd seen. "This is ridiculous," he growled, grabbing my arm. "It's just Halloween decorations playing tricks on your eyes." Despite my hysterical protests, he dragged me toward the front door, determined to prove me wrong. The fake skeleton on our porch rattled against the siding as he yanked the door open, declaring, "See, there's nothing that—" Words died in his throat. The woman slowly turned her head toward us, her face illuminated by the jack-o'-lantern's flickering light. She rose to her feet, the bloody knife glinting orange in the darkness. My father slammed the door so hard our plastic decorations fell from the walls. While my mother called the police, my father retrieved his 12-gauge shotgun from the gun safe. He cracked the door just enough to point the barrel through the gap, past our now toppled candy bowl. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice steady despite his fear. Her response was chilling. "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." Her voice had a sing-song quality that was more terrifying than any Halloween sound effect I'd ever heard. When my father mentioned the police, she let out a laugh that would have put any horror movie villain to shame, then disappeared into the darkness, still clutching her bloody knife. My uncle, who lived next door and had his own elaborate Halloween display, had been warned by my father's phone call. He was waiting on his decorated porch with his shotgun when she walked past. "Keep moving," he told her, the orange glow of his own jack-o'-lanterns casting strange shadows across his face. The police found her 15 minutes later, trying to break into another decorated house down the street. We later learned she lived nearby and had stopped taking her psychiatric medication. She and her husband had fought that night, and when she attacked him with the knife but failed to do serious harm, she turned the blade on herself, either attempting suicide or trying to frame him. That Halloween changed me forever. I never watched horror movies in the living room again, and to this day I can't stand the sound of porch swings. Every Halloween, when I see houses decorated with fake blood and plastic knives, I remember that night. The real blood, the real knife, and the woman on our porch swing who proved that the scariest things on Halloween aren't the decorations or costumes, but the horrors that can show up uninvited at your door. Years later, I learned more disturbing details about that night. Apparently, before coming to our house, the woman had wandered through several other Halloween parties in the neighborhood. People thought she was just another parent in a creative costume. After all, who looks twice at someone covered in blood on Halloween night? Some kids even complimented her on her realistic outfit. It wasn't until she started rambling about her husband and brandishing the very real kitchen knife that people realized something was terribly wrong. The following Halloween, our neighborhood formed a community watch program. Parents started accompanying their kids in larger groups, and every house installed motion sensor lights. My father added security cameras, though I suspect that was more for my peace of mind than actual necessity. The woman was institutionalized, but the fear she brought to our street lingered like a ghost story.